thank everyone for being here at the Judicial Clerkship presentation brought to you by the Career Planning Office. As many of you already know, a judicial clerkship is one of the strongest foundations upon which you can build your law career. The training in legal analysis, writing, and research received by judicial clerks often leads to rewarding careers in public and private practice, and often in academia. Many of our professors here at the law school did a judicial clerkship after they graduated from law school. Well, we're happy to be joined today by 4 current judicial clerks who are so generously giving of their time to come and talk to us about their clerkships and the entire judicial clerkship application process. Our first panelist today, I'm going to go a little out of order because that's how I have it on the paper, is Jeremy Kidd. Jeremy is the law clerk to Chief Judge Alice Batchelder of the United States Court of Appeals for the 6th Circuit. And although Jeremy is not a graduate of our law school, Judge Batchelder is. Prior to his current clerkship, Jeremy was a law clerk for the United States District Court for the District of Utah. He was a lawyer at the law firm of Ballard Spahr, and he was a legislative assistant to the Honorable James V. Hansen, United States House of Representatives. Jeremy is a graduate of George Mason Law School and the University of Utah. Utah State University. Okay, sorry. Utah State University.
It could be worse. You could have said you would.
Okay. Our second panelist today is Michael Altvader. Michael is a 2008 graduate of Akron Law School, and he's the current judicial clerk for staff attorney, what the proper term is. Either or. For Judge Eleanor Marsh Stormer, who was elected to the Summit County Court of Common Pleas in 2004. Next is Lindsay Breedlove. Lindsay is a law clerk to Judge Deborah Cook, who is a judge in the United States Court of Appeals for the 6th Circuit. Lindsay is a graduate of Harvard Law School and Georgetown University. And Lindsay was a summer associate at Hogan and Hartson, and she also worked as a summer intern for the U.S. Department of Justice. And our fourth panelist is Lisa Nemes. I'm going to get it wrong. Nemes. Lisa is the judicial attorney for Summit County Court of Common Pleas Judge Allison McCarty. And Lisa is also a mediator for the Small Claims Division of the Akron Municipal Court. And in the past, Lisa was also an intern for Community Legal Aid in Canton. Lisa is a graduate of Akron Law School, and she has a bachelor's degree from Youngstown State University. I'm now going to turn the presentation over to our panelists. I'm going to ask them to talk a bit about their experience with applying for judicial clerkships, how they chose which judges to apply to, what the interview process was like, and what it's like to be a judge's law clerk. And then I have some questions prepared, and then I'm going to open it up to you to ask your questions. But before I turn it over, please help me in welcoming them to the Let's start at this end, Mike. Okay. Why don't you just talk a little bit about what you do for Judge Marsh Stormer, and a little bit about the whole process and why you decided to become a law clerk, and a little bit of the nitty-gritty.
Well, why I decided to become a law clerk is an easy question. Is because it was the only job I had available to me. So you take what you can get. I spent my first and second year of law school clerking for a private practice firm. While I was clerking for them, I established a relationship with people at Judge Stormer's court. They asked me to come clerk for her. I think it was between my second and third year. So I clerked for her. Really enjoyed the summer there. It's a trial court. It's a very chaotic and busy place to be, which fits well with my personality and the kind of work environment I like. And the timing just kind of worked out well, where I was graduating and passing the bar exam, and they were looking for a clerk. She was familiar with me and hired me. So no real interview process. The interview was the clerkship. I mean, it was a 3-month-long interview.
So being at the right time, right place at the right time.
Right place at the right time.
Jeremy.
I decided I wanted to be a law clerk because I want to teach. And if you want to go into legal academia, clerking is not an option. Unless you, of course, you went to Harvard or Yale. Sometimes. But it's difficult. It's difficult to get in academia, and one of the things you have to have is a clerkship. So I knew from the beginning that I wanted to do a clerkship. application process was, I imagine it differs from every school. I talked to a couple of my professors who went to University of Chicago and Harvard and Georgetown, and they admittedly had very little advice to give me, because for them it was, they were expected to get a federal clerkship, and it was just a matter of, you know, spreading the net broadly so they had as many opportunities as possible. If you don't go to a top 25 law school, at least if you want to do a federal clerkship, the process is a little more, you can still cast that broad net and try and throw out hundreds of applications, but what you really need is something to get you past that initial looking at resumes and tossing most of them in the garbage. Because most, especially federal judges, I have no advice to offer with state court clerkships. I didn't even apply, but for federal, most federal judges will receive hundreds, if not thousands, of resumes every year. And unless they were to hire someone on a full-time basis just to peruse law clerk applications, they have to use some method of screening. They know if you went to Harvard or Yale that there's a very small chance that you're going to be a complete idiot. So they can use that as a way to get rid of most of them. Top 10 in your law school class is very useful. All of these are different signals that the judges will use to filter. But again, if you didn't go to a top 25 law school, you got to have something pretty impressive on your resume, or you have to work your connections. And so I found just about everyone I knew who had any connection to a federal judge, and I made sure that people who liked me were federal judges. And I applied to all of those judges, and I asked each of the people who were my connection to just put in a good word. It won't get you the job, but it can get you past that initial filtering. Once you get past that filtering, your resume has to be strong enough to get an interview, and from then on out, it's just your personal interaction with the judge. But since you guys are at in a similar circumstance to what I was, to my circumstance, where you're not at a top 25 law school, although University of Akron is a fantastic law school, you are going to need to be a little strategic in how you go about looking for clerkships, at least if you want to do a federal clerkship. So this is quite the original question, but I had one bit of advice to offer you. It is to find, maybe people in your family, relatives you have, but also find one of your professors that you like, that you're interested in the same topical material as they do their research on. Get to know them, offer to help them, offer to proof papers for them, whatever you have to do so that when it comes time to do that application process, it's not an awkward situation. So could you think, maybe like if you were feeling up to it and didn't feel like it was too much of an, you could just ask them. They know you, they know your work, they know you're a good person, they know that you're not going to embarrass them. And if they clerk for someone, then they can put in a good word for you. You're going to have to do that, just the situation you're in.
I'll start with the why did I want a clerk question first. When I was at the Department of Justice, after my 1L summer, I was at a section that did trial work and appellate work, and they were gracious enough through their summer program to bring in former employees, I guess you'd say, who had gone on to bigger and better things, people in the Solicitor General's office, people who were partners at big Washington, D.C. law firms, and virtually everyone that I can think of who came to talk to us had a federal appellate clerkship. And I thought, wow, I want those jobs, so maybe I should try to get a federal appellate clerkship, which is, even for someone from Harvard, significantly easier said than done. I had to get my grades up a lot from my 1L year, but it mattered. People noticed that I had done better, so if you feel like there's a glitch somewhere in there, show the trend and explain it away if you can. And then when I was after I'd sort of decided to do a federal appellate clerkship, I spent a summer at a firm in DC, and the people in that appellate section said, yes, do an appellate clerkship, but also do a district court clerkship. So next year I'm actually going to clerk on the Eastern District of Pennsylvania for a judge in Philadelphia, and I'm thrilled about that. I can't say that all firms with appellate shops would say the same thing, but I've heard a lot of them who say that both of those experiences are good experiences to have. And in that vein, I pretty much thought that I was going to go to a district court clerk first and then get a recommendation from that judge to get a circuit clerkship, which is how it works a lot of the time. My co-clerk went to the University of San Diego for law school. He clerked right out of law school for a bankruptcy court judge there. Then he got a job with Judge Sarah Leoy in the Northern District, who shares a building actually with Judge Cook, and got recommended by Judge Leoy to Judge Cook, and that's how he is where he is now. So if you have if you have a set idea of where you want to be in your mind, think about the different avenues you may use to get to that place. Because to be honest, no matter where you're coming from, it's a crapshoot. In the federal application process, I don't know, like the federal hiring calendar, do you know about that?
The Oscar.
The Oscar stuff? Okay.
I'm going to talk about that a little bit. There's one on handout.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just, for most people, for virtually all 3 Ls, all judges you apply to who are federal judges are going to get your resume on the same day, and they're all going to try to interview you. And so whoever calls you first, you say yes, because you're not sure how many calls are going to come, and then you end up where you end up. So it just so happened that I got lucky that I'm from Cleveland, and Judge Cook thought that was a good connection for me to merit a position in her office. But you never know. Sometimes you have to roll the dice a lot of times. I'm in the process of trying to become a Supreme Court clerk. I'm sure I will roll those die as many times as I am not embarrassed by, because there are only 36 of them. So, you just give it a go.
The reason that I decided to become a law clerk is because I was really unsure in my third year what I wanted to do. I had picked an area that I thought I really wanted to practice in, and I really liked the broad exposure that you get working in a trial court, especially seeing the different types of civil litigation and the criminal law too. And my experience was similar to Mike's. I actually worked for my judge. She was a municipal court judge when I was in law school, and I clerked for her then. And she won the election to her seat on the Court of Common Pleas. I think it was 4 or 5 days after I passed the bar exam. So I was very lucky. She offered me the job then, and I've been with her for a year and a half since. And I think networking is just the crucial way to go about it at that level. I don't know any judges that are in a position to my judge or similar positions that don't hire somebody they know, and that's really the only way to get an interview or to stand a chance of getting the job. The personal contact is the best way to do it. So an internship or being familiar with that judge is probably the best way to do that.
Did you work for Judge McCarty through the externship program here in the law school?
No, I did the civil litigation program simultaneously while I clerked for her, but I was a paid clerk for her in municipal court.
Jeremy and Lindsay, can you talk, first actually let me talk a little bit about the whole system for applying for federal clerkships. There's something called OSCAR. I have no idea what OSCAR stands for. If OSCAR's the guy who invented this thing, it's not, do you know what OSCAR actually stands for?
No, but it's an acronym.
It's an acronym, but I don't know exactly what it is. But OSCAR is the online system that all 95% of federal judges use to hire their law clerks. This handout here, the thick one, Judicial Clerkships, talks about the OSCAR program at the back, and it gives you nitty-gritty details of how to do it. You will have access to OSCAR, I think it's May 21st. Jeannie didn't put the date on here, but I think this year's, they call it the rollout for OSCAR, I believe is Friday, May 21st. Which means that you can then go online, register with OSCAR, check out the whole system, see what it's all about, start uploading your resume and everything else that you have to upload at the end of May. The next important date is Tuesday, September the 7th. That's the date when OSCAR releases all those hundreds of thousands of resumes that are out there from all those law students. Oscar pushes the button and releases them to all those federal judges across the country who use the Oscar system. So that's in September. And then 3 days after that, on Friday, September 10th, is when judges can first start contacting you for interviews. Okay, now I've heard stories, and I'm going to ask this in a little bit, I've heard stories from other federal clerks, and judges, if they want to get the top students, they want to get, the best law clerks that they can get. And I've heard that they start calling, and if you've given your cell phone number and you're sitting in class and your cell phone vibrates, you might want to just excuse yourself and take that call, because I've heard they go down the list, and if you don't take the call, you might get the last interview slot at the end of the week when they're doing their interviews, and if they like the first or second person that they interview, they may cancel all the rest of their interviews. Is that true? Have you heard that?
I have to say, I didn't get either one of my clerkships through the Oscar
Okay.
system.
Is your judge one of the 5% that doesn't use Oscar, or was it she does, but she chose you in a different way?
I don't think either of my judges use Oscar.
Okay.
Well, that's probably not fair. I think they're both signed up for Oscar. But because Oscar is only binding on third-year law students, anyone who's out practicing for a year or 2 years or 3 years and decides they want to do a clerkship, they can apply in January, February, March, April. And I actually had a friend who had clerked with Judge Batchelder, and I was talking to her about the fact that I was going to apply to Judge Batchelder, and she indicated that most of the time Judge Batchelder gets a number of applications during the summer, and usually makes your choice before the Oscar deadline. And so I put in my application. It was similar. I got my clerkship with the district court about a year and a half in advance. Both of them I did after a year of practice. So the one thing I can tell you, not from my own experience, but from my friends who went through the Oscar process, and few of them for about 2 weeks were out of town, Wisconsin, missing classes because they were flying around the country doing on-site interviews with different judges. The day that all of those were released, they were running outside the law school every 5 minutes to check their messages because people had absolutely awful reception. And so I don't know whether that helped them at all, but I do know that that was what they did, and a number of them got clerkships. So.
And one thing with clerkships, you said your friends were flying around the country. That's all on you. The judge is not paying for you to fly around the country. If you're applying for a judge in California and you get an interview, the judge is not paying for you to fly there. That's all on you. So keep that in mind when you are submitting your applications. Don't apply to a judge for whom you wouldn't interview and for whom you really don't want to work. Okay, so yeah, cast a wide net, but think of where it is that you really would go if you were called. Did you, Lindsay and Jeremy, did you only apply for federal clerkships, and the same for Michael? And well, you didn't really apply, you just kind of fell into it. Did you think about federal clerkships, or did you?
No, I was a mediocre at best student, so that was completely out of the picture for me. So you got to work with what you got. So that's what I did.
Well, so did you apply for? You said you didn't apply for a state court clerkship, Jeremy.
That was, it was something that I was interested in, but just for a particular state Supreme Court justices, and because they weren't on the hiring plan for Oscar, because it's only federal, that was sort of like going to be my second step if things didn't go well. I did both of my clerkships, the one I'm in now and next year, I did through the Oscar system. It was a mad rush. It cost me, you learn about what interviews you may have on a Friday. You have to be there, or a Thursday, you have to be there the next week if they're interviewing you on the first day. And so I flew from Boston to Philly to Detroit, to Philly to Cleveland to Boston in 2 days. And it cost me like every penny that I had. Like I readjusted my finances for the semester, all that. So I should have planned for it. If it's something you're interested in, planning for it is a good thing, or knowing you can carry the debt load, I guess. But I've also, I guess, because Judge Cook hires on the Oscar plan, seen what it looks like to get applications. And we really do, Judge Cook has 4 clerks, and she hired 2 of them over the summer because they weren't 3Ls. They were coming from either other clerkships or private practice. But then we did hire 2 people straight out of law school. We hired them on the first day. One of them had a phone interview in the morning before the rest of the interviews. So if you can't get there, but you want to clerk for that judge, suggesting a phone interview is always a good idea. She interviewed 14 people for the 2 slots. They had 600 applications. She didn't make up her mind until the end of the day, so we didn't cancel any of the interviews. She actually hired one of the last people we interviewed, but it's totally up to the judge how she wants to do it. I actually had my interview scheduled with Judge Cook the second day of interviews, and she called me while I was in the Philadelphia airport and said, "I'm hiring today, but I want to interview you. Can we do a phone interview right now?" So I said, "Of course." But it's also, that's part of the stress of the process. If you're going to go through it, you just, how comfortable you are with something and how you want your schedule to go, it doesn't really matter. You just do what they want you to do when they want you to do it.
What factors did you consider applying?
I applied for district court and circuit court clerkships. I only applied to district court clerkships in cities where I wanted to live. I applied to circuit courts in specific circuits. Somehow I decided I wasn't going to apply in the 8th, the 10th, or the 11th. I'm not really sure how that process worked. Maybe I didn't want to live there. I made a few exceptions based on the judges, but there's a lot of information out there on the internet about judges' political leanings. You should talk to people if you know who work for the judge, basically, like to see sort of what their style is like. But my general rule was, so there are 2 categories of things that might be offensive. Someone might be a horrible person to work for, and someone might require you to go against your political leanings. And my rule was, if they are not both horrible to work for and opposite me on the political spectrum, they are in the in category. I will apply there if I want to live in that city. And I think that's pretty good advice because if you like the work, then you can get over someone's personality. If you hate the work and you like the person you're working for, you can get over it too.
What do you think judges look for? When Judge Marshall hired you, you had worked for her. When she initially took you on, what do you think she was looking for?
I think first and foremost, it's competence. Judges are, we are unbelievably busy. At any given time, we have about 400 civil cases on the docket and 100 criminal cases. So there's a lot to juggle. That's just kind of the nature of a trial court. So the judge needs to know that the person that she hires is going to be able to do their job in the best manner possible without having to worry about it too much. So I think that is the first and foremost requirement. Second of all, my particular judge, and I think maybe this is true of trial court judges, but I think they look for someone who's well-rounded. We just had an interview with a first-year student from Akron, and this guy, he did the student senate in college, and he's members of clubs, and speech and debate, the whole deal, and that's something that my particular judge responds well to. But I think for the trial court, since there is so many different things, you are wearing different hats. You're going from criminal to lien priority to civil procedure. You're switching all day long. So I think that would be important. And one thing I should add real quick is that there's no statewide system, there's no Oscar system for state court judges. I know the 9th District, they put out an email. The 9th District kind of interviews people collectively. The 9th District is the Court of Appeals right up the street there. They kind of interview people collectively, and I think they put an email out with some deadlines that goes through everybody.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. The federal courts make it a little bit easier to apply because they have the Oscar system. The state court system, you almost have to call the individual judges' chambers and ask, are you hiring a law clerk? Because there's no system. There's no, overall system that keeps track of who's hiring and who's not hiring. So it is almost easier to apply for a federal clerkship because you've got this nice Oscar system where you download everything, you pick the judges you want your resume to go to, and you submit. So.
But if you're looking for a state court clerkship, I mean, you have to, doing a clerkship or you're doing a, an externship through the law school might be something you want to do. But if you do an externship through a judge who's had the same judicial attorney for the last 30 years, that's not going to change.
Right.
And if you're looking for a job with your
Unless they're
judge,
retiring.
you're spinning your wheels. You'd be better off with a strategy. You might say, okay, well, this judge is running for election this year. She has a judicial attorney who's been there for 20 years. They're not going anywhere. But what about their opponent? Like maybe the opponent would win. I mean, you have to look everywhere, And so that means, if you're looking for a job in Akron, you got to read ohio.com local section every single day because you never know what will pop up there or what you'll come across, or whatever town you're looking for. I mean, you got to mine, and try to find those opportunities if you're going to get in with a state court judge.
Sounds like something like that happens with Lisa. Judge McCarty was a municipal court judge, and
So, I mean, it was really catching my best because if she hadn't won the election, I wouldn't have had a job.
Right.
I would have been out there searching, probably far behind the rest of my fellow law students who've been submitting applications. So it's kind of a risk, but it paid off, so.
it all worked out, yeah. What would you say, Lindsay and Jeremy, you mentioned that your judge does use Oscar. When all of those resumes and cover letters come in through Oscar, how does she weed them in? What does she look for? Any specific tips that you might have?
We actually do it. The clerks do it. So we split up, this sounds horrible, and I hated learning about it, but we split up the application pool by last name, and we went through, we found people with Ohio connections at the top of their class. I mean, there are a few things I think that are sort of, that irk judges. Like, if you have not had an amazing first career and or have not published, do not have a resume that is longer than a page. Because they'll look at you and they'll say, I could fit my resume on one page. Like, why does this 20-something think they're so much more important than I? We actually look at the interest section at the bottom of a resume. I don't know if that's part of how you would submit it, like, to all jobs, but do put, like, interest colon, and then be honest. But if you're obsessed with something, like, make it look like you have a diverse set of interests. But the judge cares about that. Like, if someone, she loves golf. If someone plays golf, she wants to know. And then I read writing samples. I don't know that everyone else who was doing it was reading writing samples, but as a federal appellate clerk, there's nothing more important than being able to say what you want to say in a concise and persuasive way. And if there are grammatical mistakes or if the writing sample doesn't make sense, it's too much work for a judge to have to do when the judge like mine hires new people every year. It's only a one-year gig, so I would recommend working on a writing sample if you feel really proud of.
When you're putting together your writing sample, you may be thinking to yourself that in your case was you've seen these long, elaborate, very eloquent opinions typically written by Posner, Easterbrook, any number of people on the Ninth Circuit. What you have to realize is that the cases where those long, eloquent, detailed opinions are necessary are few and far between. The vast majority of opinions that get written are going to be very short, because most cases don't require that complicated of analysis. So when you're doing your writing sample, Lindsay said, you shouldn't be thinking in your mind of the latest Stevens or Thomas or Scalia opinion written in the Supreme Court. You should be thinking of the 3-page concise opinion that was just handed down by a local trial judge, because that's most of the work you're going to be doing. And having had to go through other opinions, because we get opinions in our offices from other judges, and we have to decide whether to join them or whether we're going to concur, whether we're going to dissent. And sometimes you get an opinion that some of the law clerk has written for their judge, and they've got just 20 pages too much stuff. And And the judge, most judges don't like that. And so, that makes it less than helpful to me.
I'm gonna go plug real quick, sorry. These are my Bibles, my writing Bibles. Strunk and White, Elements of Style, you guys have probably all heard of that. This one, I'd never heard of until the Department of Justice told me about it. It's called Mightier Than the Sword by a man called C. Edward Good. Everything that I have learned about writing, I just went and dug this up again, but everything I've learned about writing in my clerkship was already in this book. So had I paid attention to it the first time, I'm sure that my writing would have been substantially better.
Who wrote it?
C. Edward Good. And I don't know this person, so it's not like I'm getting it. We have an extern from the University of Akron right now, and I actually pulled this book out because I remembered this one section about using cases to argue by analogy, and I made a copy of it for him. And that's what's part of the It's very good.
Great. Are there any specific things that any of you could add that you should not include in a cover letter or a resume to a judge? The weird things that you've seen come across your...
I can only comment from the perspective of, I guess it's kind of similar when we hire interns who get occasionally resumes, and I've got some really odd non-legal careers that people listed, and it was just kind of, it looks like filler on the page. But, like they were talking about the activity section, one of our current interns that we hired, one of the things that jumped off her resume was that she put that she was interested in running in marathons, and that was why we pulled her to the top of the stack, because a couple people in her office also run. So, putting odd and irrelevant things on your resume is probably bad, whereas, some general interest in activities would be good.
I would just say don't overdo. I mean, putting that, like running marathons, we like to call. As long as it's in the interest section, it's just kind of at the bottom. Because if they're balancing, which of these two people take, well, which one looks more interesting? Because I think, at least for my judges, both of them wanted someone that they knew wouldn't be a complete jerk in the office, someone that would get along with the rest of the staff. Because you've got to live home at night, but you're working in pretty close quarters with the rest of with the staff, the other clerks, and the judge for a good year, sometimes more. And so they want to know that when they're bringing someone in, it's someone that's going to get along with everybody else. And so having someone that's a little interesting is fine, but if that's all you've got on your resume, or you're overdoing it, you're putting, not just that you like to run marathons, but you're listing every marathon you've run, that.
And that's good advice for any job.
Yeah.
Whether you're interviewing with a judge or with a law firm or a public interest organization, you want to hire somebody that's interesting, that's going to get along with everybody else in the office. So that's very true.
And it's always the same, just another general rule of thumb is always know your audience. So, like Lindsay was saying, there's a lot of information out there on any public figure, including judges. And you can find out what they've done in the past, what their family does for them. I'm not talking about cyber stalking them, you don't have to do anything creepy. But find out what their interests are. And if they're really far removed from what your interests are, then you probably wouldn't get along with them. Or if you did, you might not get along with people in the office, or maybe people. But if you have something that is similar, make sure that's on the resume. If they in a previous life were very involved in politics, you don't have to put die-hard Democrat, never vote for a Republican, thinking that might sway them. They're probably not going to care about that. But if they're if they were involved in politics, and you can put down that I volunteered on so and so's campaign and I knocked doors, that's something that they will have something in common with you. They know that in times when you're not talking about cases, you actually will have something you can make small talk about. So did you ever do, and so there could be moments of lighthearted conversation to relieve the stress.
One other little tip about that, know your audience. FEDSA, ACLU, and ACS. I don't know how active they are on this campus. They're really good for some judges and really not good for other judges. You can have more than one version of the resume on Oscar. I recommend it if you're a member of one of those organizations to have more than one version. And if you're not sure how someone's going to take one of those things, unless you're like, an officer and it's your primary school activity, leave it off. Because it can be an immediate, my judge hasn't done it, but I've heard of others that say, no ACS kids, no kids.
let's talk a little bit about interviewing for a clerkship. Mike, could you go through a interviewing process with?
No, I mean, again, my interview was the clerkship. And my only advice there, it is a 3-month-long interview. So you got to make the decision, or how good your work going to be. I mean, you never hand in my opinion, you never hand the judge a draft. You don't give her a rough draft of anything. You give her the final draft, and that means, no typos, no punctuation mistakes. I mean, obviously, substantively, she's going to have something to, add because your law students don't know anything yet. But it's got to be clean and polished. And there's some minimum standards, and I don't think I need to go through them here. But there's some minimum standards, and you got to hit all those minimum standards because if you don't, then you're standing out for the wrong reasons, and your shot is over. So just don't screw anything up ever.
What do you do if you do screw something up? How do you fix it?
If you do, well, it's funny. Early on, like I did make quite a few mistakes, and you don't read the entire case. You read most of the case, and you think you got it. And you don't read the entire case, and then you get the question on it. And then you kind of it's like bombs on it. So you just learn and move on. But don't if you make a mistake, you got to admit it. Learn from it and move on. The worst thing you can do is try to cover it up or try to talk in circles or anything. I mean, when you screw up, you just have to accept it.
Yeah, I would just say on interviews, and this may not sound like it's helpful, but trust me, it is. It depends on who you're interviewing. Again, you have to know your audience. There are some judges that all they care about is your work product. I think Posner is pretty well known for just working as clerks. 9-day, really tough. You have a Posner clerkship, it looks good on the resume, but it's really tough. And his interviews, from what I've heard, tend to be fairly detailed towards your work. Other judges, again, they've already seen your resume. It's like when you do oral arguments in your court. When you've submitted a brief to the court, they've already read your brief when you're doing oral arguments, so you don't have to hit every point. They just want to have a question and answer it. The interview can be the same way. They've already seen your resume. They've already seen what you've done in law school, what you've done before. A lot of time, for a lot of judges, what they want to know is, again, is this someone who's going to just irritate me to death over the next year, or is this someone that I can just sit and have a casual conversation and we're on a rare occasion toward the end? So it depends on your judge, and you really need to know. You get an interview, you need to do some serious work on the judge's background. Anyone who's ever clerked for more than an hour, you gotta know the specifics about your judge.
What kinds of questions do judges ask?
The hardest one I got was, who are your favorites from the court cases? And it may be hard because I don't have the same political leanings as my judge. But I had to, I had to think of reasons why too. She wanted to know why. The first one, I think I said that I thought Scalia was a great writer, and that I liked Justice Ginsburg because at the time she was the only woman on the court, I think. You're going to get some interesting questions, probably no matter who you're interviewing for, whether it's a judge or not. So to the extent that you can be part of a mock interview program, or just sit down with someone you don't know very well and have them go over things with you, the more at ease you seem, the better you're going to come across as a potential employee.
And it might not always be the exact answer that you give. Maybe she really didn't care who you chose. She wanted to see how well composed you remain and how well you reasoned out your answer. I like Justice Scalia so much.
It was a phone interview, because if you would see my face when she asked me the question. The real problem was the first thing that came out of my mouth was Justice Brennan, which is true, like the wrong answer to give when it's a conservative judge. So I had to cover that. About an externship or a clerkship as an interview, it's really true. I know that Judge Cook is looking to hire of Akron. She said as much. She's been on the federal bench since 2003. She's had one person from the University of Akron. If you're trying to get an externship with the hopes that it will turn into a job, make sure that your work product is ready for that job. Like if you've only done research for a professor and you've never written memos for people that were shorter on a particular research issue or whatever, you need to have that skill set when you walk in the door. Because when it's an interview, though it is an opportunity to develop more, you need to prove yourself every time you turn something in. So if, say you wanted to clear for Judge Cook, I would not get an externship with Judge Cook during your 2L year. I would try to do it during your 3L year, just because your writing is going to be more polished, your analytical skills are going to be better. Think through those things.
When I was on the district court, I think I was the first law clerk in about 7 or 8 years that my judge had taken who hadn't been an extern for him before. Doesn't mean every extern got a clerkship, but kind of linking the two ideas together, like Lindsay said, it was the clerks who came in and their first memo to the judge was one that got passed to the coordinator, the extern coordinator, read through it and went, yeah, that looks good, go hand it to the judge. Then when they submitted their applications for a clerkship, everyone said, yeah, they were fantastic. Just right off the bat, everyone knew that they could do the job. Getting an externship with a judge is a perfect way to. Then they don't have to run the risk of argue someone that's going to irritate them the entire time. They've already had at least one conversation with you, hopefully. And if they know your work, they know that's quality. It removes all the uncertainty. Judges are like everyone else. They hate risk. They hate uncertainty. And the more uncertainty you can take out of the equation, the more likely they are to take a chance.
Lisa, did you, when you initially went to work for Judge McCarty, through the civil litigation?
I just started actually, I knew I wanted to work for a judge, so I started as an intern at the courthouse and there were no openings, but I knew that there were 2 students that were graduating from Akron, so I kind of scoped out the judges that I liked, and when I knew it was nearing the time that my judge was going to be losing her law clerk, I put the application in and did have a brief interview with her. But
What kinds of things did she ask you? Can you remember?
it was mainly, I think she wanted to see, my judge was a prosecutor prior to being on the bench, so she's extremely competent when it comes to the criminal stuff, but she needs someone, to fill her in on the things that maybe she didn't learn and practice on the civil end of it. So she wants someone who, wanted to make sure that I was really capable, I guess, with civil procedure and that I would understand how to handle and manage her entire civil docket. That was what her focus was. And that was, basically the entire time I was doing my job, I even though in municipal court it was much smaller docket, about, a tenth of the size that I handle now, that was what she wanted to see, was I able to manage all the cases and do all the writing and all the research for them. And I guess kind of she wanted to see if you were able to take charge and kind of step up and have a little bit of initiative instead of depending on the judge to tell you what to do and when to do it, to maybe come up with your own suggestions and figure things out on your own and see how that works.
Can you each, I didn't realize it's already after 1 o'clock, so I know some students have class starting again in a few minutes, but can you just each briefly give us an idea, what's a typical day like for you? Is there a typical day? What kinds of work do you do? And when we get to you, Lindsay, can you talk about what we do for the Court of Appeals? Well, and Jeremy can touch on that too. How is that different from your district court? Sounds like you run crazy all day.
Yeah, it can be. It can be really crazy, or it can be really quiet. We have trials certain days. We have a thing on Wednesdays called Criminal Call Day. It's something that everyone should experience once as a law student. Call Day is the day that everyone, every person who has a felony case in front of the judge, who has either a pretrial or a status conference or a sentencing or an arraignment, whatever they have, they go in front of the judge that day. So it's a little chaotic. I mean, you could go into the back of the courtroom and start doing jumping jacks, and nobody would ever even notice you. I mean, it's just kind of a crazy day. But you should all experience it once as a law student. I know Howard's been there several times for it, and probably attest to the things I'm saying now. So, you know, every day is, you know, different. Trial days are a little bit more hectic.
What are you doing for the judge when these, you know, this?
Call day, I shut my door to the office and get like real work done. Other days, you're kind of, you know, for the most part, you've got your project in front of you. You know, you're working on, you know, putting out an order on a motion for summary judgment. You know, but then you get a call about the hearing for next week, and then, you know, the judge stops in and what's going on with this case. So it is a lot of multitasking. That's about all I have to say about that.
For me, both district court and circuit court, most of my duties are basically the same. There's a series of cases that I run, I shepherd over. The research in order to prep the judge for circuit oral argument, the trial court, most of the time oral argument, but also trial. I make sure all the research is in line, read through the briefs, read through all of the supplementary materials, make sure there's a bench memo that explains everything to the judge the best I can do it. So my day is basically that. I show up, I do legal research all day, and then I go home. At the trial, the only difference is that at the circuit we have oral argument, and so you fly down or drive down to Cincinnati, and for a day or two we sit through oral argument. It's a 3-judge panel. That's a lot easier than at the district court level with the trial. Because any time of the trial, it's a big mess. You get jury selection. You have all the objections, and the prosecution or the defense brings in something that no one knew about before. Right. Objection, Your Honor. That's prohibited. You know, under rule whatever. Judge. Yeah. At the district court, we had email and messenger on the computers, and the judge said, "Okay, so what do I do?" Oh heavens, I don't know. So I run out of the courtroom, and I'm telling my other co-workers, "Okay, this is what we need to figure out. Email me as quick as you find something." And I run back in. So.
Is that why judges call recess every once in a while? Because they need time to figure out
They're
what's going
fine.
on?
It's the clerks who are sweating back, back behind the curtain. Don't peer behind the curtain. Just assume. No. So I mean, that's the primary difference. Just trial much more chaotic than oral argument. But most of it's just legal research. So you got to be good at that. You got to be good at writing so that people can understand what you're doing.
I have the same experience. It's pretty predictable. We have oral argument 7 times in a year. You get the cases, I don't know, maybe 2 months in advance. We prepare memos as well, but if it's an easy case, we just write an opinion. And then after the oral argument, on the cases for which we wrote memos, there's a little bit of there are staff attorneys who work in Cincinnati. That's where the 6th Circuit sits, and when we are on schedule of reviewing staff attorney work, that I say takes a pretty big chunk of my time, just to make sure that the cases that they're handling that are, I guess, sort of the more routine matters are handled correctly. But I'm a perfectionist, so I think that's probably not a typical experience. Most people probably say, okay, it's fine.
My morning usually starts off with the judge has me handle all of the first pre-trials by myself. So this usually I have 3 or 4 first pre-trials or status conferences in the morning before she gets there. And when she comes in, then I have to sit down and debrief her on everything. And like Mike said, I spend most of the day sitting there with my project in front of me, hoping that I'll actually get an opportunity to get to it. And another one of the interesting things with my judge is I quickly learned that she does not like memos and doesn't like to read them. So I really have to make a point of outlining things to myself and getting an opportunity to sit down with her and to go over things so that I can get an idea of what direction she wants to go on something before I sit down and draft the opinion. Because of course, if I just drafted the opinion, I would find out later that she wanted to go in the complete opposite direction. So my whole day is basically about finding time to actually get my research and writing done.
Does anybody have any questions? We only have a few minutes before many of you probably have to go to class and they have to get back to work. Does anybody have any questions? No questions, yeah.
Well, it's kind of more about the Oscar system, and I was surprised to hear that they do the hiring in September, where most graduates, graduate in May. And I was curious about when the actual clerks.
Well, they're hiring in September at the beginning of your third year.
Okay.
So for current second years, they would be interviewing in September of this September, if they're gonna graduate in 2011.
To start in the spring then, of 2011?
Start in August.
Most
August of
most clerkships
2011.
run along the academic year. I'm a little different. My clerkship runs from January to January. But Judge Batchelor she has one clerk that does that. But most clerkships run September to September. So you're going to have, between graduation and starting the clerkship, if you get it, you're going to have a period of time. I think most of the time it's just assumed that you will be taking that time to pass the bar in whatever state. And at least at the federal level, passing the bar is a very good idea because you have nice people on pay if you pass the bar.
And it really doesn't matter, no matter where you do your clerkship, for federal clerk, it doesn't matter where you've taken the bar, particularly. Where are you both admitted?
Utah, DC.
Okay.
New York, St.
And for state court, it does matter. You need to be admitted in Ohio or?
No, probably. It just makes there's no requirement. It just makes no sense to do.
Sure. Okay. Anybody else? Any questions? Or do you guys have any follow-up advice or any tips that we didn't cover for students currently considering?
I just want to say, if anyone here ever wants to come down and observe a call day or observe a trial, you can always give me a holler. I don't have any business cards on me, but Summit County Court of Common Pleas, I'm easy to find. So,
Great.
but really, the invitation's out there. So.
And all the judges have holidays on different days, so pretty much any time you're available during the day, you could come down to court and catch a judge. Happy to call.
I may have to come down and experience that.
I would just say as a bit of general advice, I am the worst at this, so I should take my own advice at this. Especially with law school, when you are shelling out a lot of money to get this education. Are any of you 1 Ls? 2 Ls? 3 Ls? This isn't as helpful for you, but for the 1 Ls and 2 Ls, you need to know where you want to go, where you want to be, and you need to plan pretty detailed the steps you want to take to get there. A clerkship is a very useful tool to a lot of things. A necessary tool for academia, very useful for government work. And especially if you want to do appellate practice, which is very, I think, one of the coolest parts of the law, but most places you can't get a job doing appellate work unless you've had an appellate clerkship. But you need to know those things. You need to know where you want to live, and a clerkship is a tool, but only if you pick the right tool. If you want to live in Ohio, don't do a district court clerkship in Texas. It looks good on your resume, but one of the best parts about a clerkship, if you want to practice law, is that while you are doing a clerkship, you get to know all of the attorneys that appear before you, especially if you're in a trial court level. And knowing those attorneys will help you get a job. So you need to view a clerkship as a tool, know exactly what you want, know exactly where you want to live, and pick the clerkship that gets you there. Because there are a lot of clerkships that won't get you where you need to be. There are a lot of things about law school in general that won't get you where you want to be, even if they're very cool. So you need to be very particular about how you do things, especially if you want to do a clerkship with how you spend your money, because clerks don't make a lot of money. Now, if you're a staff attorney, they make a little bit more money, but most temporary clerks, especially in state court systems, make very little money. And if you've got a ton of student loan debt hanging over your head, a year or two with lower incomes, it's going to be really tough for you to make those student loan payments when you need to. And all of that needs to fit in. And I had this grand notion of being a legal academic someday. And I'm finding out now that there are a whole lot of things I could have done better while in law school and before to make that a possibility. Now, my dream is still alive. I can still take other steps. But if I'd have planned earlier, the process would have been a little bit easier, and I wouldn't be in my approaching late 30s, still trying to figure out, what I want to be in life. So just as a general rule, be really particular about the goals you set, where you want to be, and choose what to do in law school, what clerkships you take, so that they'll get you where you want to be. Unless you really don't care, and then going with the flow is good too.
Be proactive about it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much.